Welcome back, everyone. Today is March 29th, 2026, and I want to start today not with missiles, not with troop deployments, not with Trump's deadlines or Iran's countermoves. I want to start today in a supermarket, your supermarket. The one you drove to last Saturday morning. The one where you picked up bread and rice and cooking oil and maybe some chicken for dinner. I want you to think about that supermarket, those shelves, that ordinary Saturday morning routine that you have done hundreds of times without thinking twice about it. Because what I am going to show you in the next 20 minutes is that the war happening right now in the Persian Gulf is coming for those shelves. It is coming for that bread, it is coming for that cooking oil and that chicken. It is coming for the price of every single thing your family eats. And the reason you do not know this yet, the reason your television has not told you this yet, is because the people running this war need you calm, compliant, and unaware of what is actually being done to the global food and energy system in your name. So today I'm going to tell you the truth, all of it, number by number, country by country, crop by crop, because you deserve to know what is actually happening to the world your children are going to inherit. Let me start with oil because that is where this story begins, even though it is far from where it ends. Before February 28, 2026, the day this war started, Brent crude oil was trading at approximately $65 per barrel, a normal price, a price that kept the global economy functioning, kept fuel affordable, kept inflation manageable, kept the ordinary machinery of modern civilization running smoothly and quietly in the background the way it always does when things are fine, the way you only notice it when it stops working. Today, March 29th, Brent crude is trading above $120 per barrel. That is an increase of nearly 85% in less than 30 days. 85%. And some of the most respected energy analysts in the world, not Iranian state media commentators, not anti-war activists, but the hardened, numbers-driven analysts who work for companies like ConocoPhillips and the International Energy Agency are warning that if the Strait of Hormuz remains effectively closed, prices could reach $150, possibly $200 per barrel before this is over. Now, I know that number, $200 per barrel, sounds extreme. It sounds like an exaggeration designed to frighten people. So let me explain to you exactly why it is not an exaggeration. Before this war began, approximately 20 million barrels of oil passed through the Strait of Hormuz every single day. 20 million barrels every single day. That represents roughly 27% of the entire world's seaborne oil trade. All of it flowing through a waterway that is 24 miles wide at its narrowest point. And right now that flow has been reduced to a trickle, primarily Iranian and Chinese flagged vessels that have special permission to pass. Commercial operators, major oil companies, international insurers, they have all effectively withdrawn from the corridor. Not because Iran has physically laid a chain across the water, but because Iran has made the insurance costs of transiting that strait prohibitively expensive for any normal commercial operator through the very credible threat of attack. The International Energy Agency, which is the Western world's own energy watchdog, has called this the largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market. The largest in history, not since 1973, not since any previous crisis. The largest ever recorded. And yet somehow this fact, this staggering civilization-shaking fact, is being squeezed into 30-second segments between Trump's latest statement and a celebrity gossip story on American cable news. That tells you everything you need to know about whose interests the American media is actually serving right now. Now, let me tell you who is bearing the weight of this crisis most immediately, because it is not America. And this is the part that the American government is desperately hoping its Asian and European allies do not fully process. The United States imports relatively little oil through the Strait of Hormuz. Its domestic production and alternative supply routes give it a significant buffer that most of the world simply does not have. But its Asian partners bear an overwhelming share of the burden of this closure. More than 80% of the oil and liquefied natural gas shipped through the strait goes to Asian markets, with China, India, Japan, and South Korea as the primary destinations. Japan relies on the Middle East for approximately 90% of its crude oil imports, the vast majority of which passes through Hormuz. Think about that carefully. Japan, the world's third largest economy, a country of 125 million people, a country with no significant domestic oil production, gets 90% of its energy through a waterway that America has effectively turned into a war zone without consulting Japan once. South Korea gets about 70% of its crude from the Middle East and routes more than 95% of that through Hormuz. South Korea has already moved to activate a 100 trillion won, roughly $68 billion, emergency market stabilization program in response to the economic devastation caused by this war. China, which receives approximately 1/3 of all its oil through the Strait of Hormuz, has large strategic reserves providing some short-term cushion. But those reserves are finite, and every day this war continues, China burns through them a little faster while watching its economy slow and its manufacturing sector strain under the weight of rising energy costs. And here is the geopolitical consequence of this energy asymmetry that I want you to sit with carefully and honestly. America went to war in the Persian Gulf. America's Asian allies are paying the overwhelming majority of the energy cost of that war. America did not consult these countries before launching this military campaign. It simply acted and then handed them the bill. Former U.S. Defense Secretary James Mattis said it plainly at a recent energy industry conference. And I want you to hear these words very carefully because they come from one of the most experienced military minds America has ever produced. He said Trump will be unable to just declare victory and walk away. The Iranians have a vote on when this war ends, and I do not think we can just walk away from it. We are in a tough spot. Those are not the words of an Iranian official. Those are not the words of an anti-war protester. Those are the words of a man who ran the entire United States military and who knows better than almost anyone alive what America's actual capabilities and limitations are. And he is saying America is in a tough spot, but the countries in the truly toughest spot are the ones that had no say in starting this war and are now watching their energy security evaporate in real time while their governments scramble to find alternative supplies that simply do not exist at this scale. Now I want to move to the part of this story that I believe is the most undercovered, the most consequential, and in many ways the most frightening dimension of this entire crisis. And that is what this war is doing, not just to the price of oil, but to the global food supply. Because oil is something you can potentially replace, something you can source from alternative suppliers, something you can ration in the short term through conservation measures and emergency reserves. Food is different. Food is the non-negotiable baseline of human civilization. Without food, there is no economy to discuss, no geopolitics to analyze, no future to plan for. And the Strait of Hormuz is not just an oil choke point. It is a food choke point. It is a fertilizer choke point. And right now, all three of those flows, oil, food, and fertilizer, have been severely disrupted simultaneously at the worst possible moment in the entire agricultural calendar. Nearly half of the world's traded urea, which is the most widely used fertilizer on Earth, and large volumes of other critical fertilizers are exported from Gulf countries through the Strait of Hormuz, making global agriculture extraordinarily exposed to exactly the kind of disruption that is happening right now. Urea export prices from the Middle East have surged by approximately 40% since this war began, rising from just under $500 to just over $700 per metric ton. And the overall price is currently close to 60% higher than this time last year. Now, here is why the timing of this is particularly catastrophic and why analysts are warning that the consequences will echo through 2027 and beyond. This disruption is happening directly in the middle of the Northern Hemisphere spring planting season, which runs from mid-February to early May, and which is the single most critical agricultural window of the entire year. This is when farmers in America, in Europe, in India, in Pakistan, in China plant the crops that will feed their countries and the world for the next 12 months. And right now, those farmers are facing fertilizer prices that have risen 40 to 60% in a matter of weeks. Many of them are making an impossible choice: absorb the cost and risk financial ruin, or reduce their fertilizer application and accept lower yields. Many are choosing the second option. And when farmers across multiple major food-producing regions simultaneously reduce fertilizer use during planting season, the downstream consequences are not felt immediately. They are felt 6 months later, 8 months later, 12 months later, when the harvest comes in and it is smaller than expected, and global grain stocks fall, and food prices rise again in a second wave that will hit the world's poorest people hardest. The IEA's own assessment is that we could see food price inflation that persists well into 2027. Not 2026. 2027, more than a year from now. The damage being done to the global food system in this spring planting season, right now, today, while we are having this conversation, cannot be undone by a ceasefire signed next week. It is already baked into the harvest. Let me give you specific country examples, because I think abstraction is the enemy of genuine understanding, and I want you to feel the real-world weight of what is happening. Brazil. Brazil is almost entirely reliant on imports for its fertilizer supply, and nearly half of that supply transits through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, why does Brazil matter to the global food supply? Because Brazil accounts for nearly 60% of global soybean exports and is a major exporter of corn and sugar. When Brazilian farmers cannot get affordable fertilizer during planting season, Brazilian soybean and corn yields fall. When Brazilian yields fall, global soybean and corn prices rise. And when global corn prices rise, the price of every product that uses corn as an input rises with it, which in the modern food system is almost everything from animal feed to sweeteners to biofuels to countless processed food products. The price shock and shortage of fertilizer during this spring planting season could reduce the planting and yields of corn, which is the main feedstock for American beef, poultry, and dairy, and could increase global food prices well into 2027. American farmers, American beef, American chicken, American dairy, all of it connected to a war being fought 8,000 miles away in the Persian Gulf. And your television is not making that connection for you, because making that connection would require your television to acknowledge that this war has costs, real costs, costs that reach directly into your kitchen and onto your dinner table. And that is a conversation that the people running this war are not ready to have with the American public. Now, let me talk about the Gulf states themselves, because their situation is extraordinary and almost completely absent from Western media coverage, despite being perhaps the most dramatic illustration of how catastrophically this war has backfired on the very countries that supported it. The maritime blockade triggered by Iran's control of the Strait of Hormuz has created a concurrent grocery supply emergency across the Gulf Cooperation Council states, countries that rely on the strait for over 80% of their caloric intake. By mid-March, 70% of the region's food imports had been disrupted, forcing major retailers to airlift staples, resulting in a 40 to 120% spike in consumer food prices. Airlift. The Gulf states, some of the wealthiest nations on Earth by per capita income, nations with some of the world's most modern airports and logistics infrastructure, are airlifting basic food items, rice, flour, cooking oil, the fundamentals of daily life, because their supply chains have been severed by the same war their governments quietly helped enable. And it gets significantly worse. Iranian strikes on desalination plants in the region have created a crisis that goes beyond food, because 99% of drinking water in Kuwait and Qatar comes from desalination. 99%, nearly all of it. And those desalination plants have been struck. The nations that hosted American military bases, that allowed their airspace to be used for strikes on Iran, that quietly or openly supported this military campaign, are now facing a situation where their own citizens may not have reliable access to clean drinking water. I do not say this with satisfaction. I say it with sadness. Because ordinary Gulf citizens, ordinary Kuwaiti and Qatari families who had no more say in their government's foreign policy decisions than ordinary Iranian families had in theirs, are now paying a devastating price. There is a lesson in that about the consequences of choosing geopolitical convenience over principled positions, and I hope the leaders of those nations are learning it. Let me zoom out now and show you the complete global picture because I want you to understand the full scale of what is happening. In Europe, this war has triggered what analysts are calling a second major energy crisis following the disruption caused by the Ukraine conflict. The primary mechanism is the suspension of Qatari liquefied natural gas exports through the Strait of Hormuz. Qatar is one of Europe's most important LNG suppliers, and that supply has been severely disrupted. This disruption came at the worst possible time because European gas storage levels were already at historically low levels, approximately 30% capacity following a harsh winter. Dutch natural gas benchmark prices have nearly doubled since the war began. The European Central Bank, which had been planning to cut interest rates this year to stimulate an already sluggish European economy, has been forced to postpone those cuts and revise its inflation forecast sharply upward while cutting its growth projections. Economists are warning that energy-intensive economies across Europe face high risks of entering technical recession if this maritime blockade persists through the summer refilling season. UK inflation is expected to breach 5% in 2026. Industrial manufacturers across Europe, chemical companies, steel producers, fertilizer plants that depend on affordable gas to operate are imposing surcharges of up to 30% on their products just to remain solvent. And Stefan Angrick, an economist at Moody's Analytics, said something this week that deserves to be heard by every government, every policymaker, and every citizen on Earth. He said there is no Goldilocks scenario where the conflict ends and everything just snaps back to the way it was. There is no scenario, none, where the world simply returns to February 27, 2026, the morning before the bombs fell. The damage being done to global supply chains, to energy markets, to food systems, to financial conditions is structural and lasting. It will outlast any ceasefire. It will outlast any peace agreement. It will outlast this presidential administration, and it will be paid for not by the generals and the politicians who made the decisions that started this war, but by the ordinary people in Sri Lanka and Brazil and Japan and Pakistan and Nigeria and Indonesia and everywhere in between who had no vote, no voice, and no choice in the matter. And this brings me to what I consider the most important analytical point of this entire video, the thing that explains why Iran is doing what it is doing and why it is working. Iran cannot match America militarily. That was never possible, and Iran never claimed it would be. Iran does not have aircraft carriers or stealth bombers or satellite-guided munitions in the quantities that America possesses. What Iran has instead is a 24-mile-wide choke point through which flows 27% of the world's seaborne oil trade. And Iran, with extraordinary strategic clarity and discipline, has used that choke point to internationalize the cost of this war, to make it so expensive, so globally disruptive, so economically painful for so many countries simultaneously that the pressure for de-escalation becomes irresistible, not from within America, but from outside it, from Japan, from South Korea, from Europe, from Brazil, from every country watching its economy deteriorate in real time because of a war it did not start and cannot stop. The CEO of Kuwait Petroleum Corporation said this week, and I want you to hear these words because they come from the head of a state oil company in a country that has American military bases on its soil. He said Iran has basically imposed an economic blockade against the oil producers in the Middle East by closing the Strait of Hormuz. And this is an attack not only against the Gulf, but an attack that is holding the world's economy hostage. The head of Kuwait's oil company is using the word hostage. And ConocoPhillips CEO Ryan Lance said you just cannot take 8 to 10 million barrels a day of oil and 20% of the LNG market off the world stage without having some significant repercussions. These are not anti-war voices. These are the chief executives of the most powerful energy companies on Earth. And they are telling the world plainly and simply that what America has done has created consequences that America cannot manage or contain or fix with a press conference or a deadline extension or a cabinet meeting. The oil price floor has risen permanently according to most serious analysts. Even if the strait reopens tomorrow morning, prices will not return to pre-war levels for months because countries will need to restock depleted reserves, repair damaged infrastructure, and rebuild the trust in supply chain reliability that has been completely shattered. Gulf Arab countries will need 3 to 4 months after peace just to restore their oil production to pre-war levels because they have been forced to shut down oil wells during the closure. 3 to 4 months after peace. And the food system, the fertilizer shortage, the damaged spring planting season, those consequences will take not months but years to fully work through the global agricultural system into the plates and kitchens of ordinary people around the world. And now I want to say something directly to you, whoever you are watching this video, wherever you are in the world. If you are in Pakistan, if you are in India, if you are in Turkey, if you are in Malaysia, if you are in Nigeria, if you are in any of the dozens of countries that are right now feeling the weight of rising food prices and energy costs from a war that your government had no say in and your people had no vote on, I want you to understand something clearly. The silence of governments right now, the careful diplomatic neutrality, the studied avoidance of taking a clear moral position on what is happening, that silence is not protecting you. That silence is not keeping your economy safe or your food affordable or your energy secure. The numbers prove it. The food prices prove it. The empty shelves in Gulf supermarkets prove it. The Sri Lankan schools running 4 days a week to save fuel prove it. The Brazilian farmers skipping fertilizer during planting season prove it. The German manufacturers imposing 30% surcharges prove it. This war's consequences do not respect borders. They do not stop at the edges of the countries that started it. They flow through every supply chain, every shipping lane, every fertilizer bag, every gas pump, every grocery receipt into the daily lives of billions of people who are completely invisible to the people making the decisions in Washington and Tel Aviv. And the only thing that will change that, the only thing that will bring those shelves back to full, bring those prices back down, bring that fertilizer back to those farmers, bring the ships moving again through those 24 miles of water, is a genuine negotiated settlement that treats Iran as a sovereign nation with legitimate security concerns and not as an obstacle to be eliminated. Until that conversation happens, the supermarket shelves will keep getting a little emptier. The prices will keep climbing a little higher. And the people who will pay the most are the ones who can least afford it. I will see you in the next video.